Hi, this is Miss Loeffler, and today we're going to do lesson 51 in Algebra 1, and it's about graphing linear equations. So we already started to sort of do this in the previous lesson, but let's start with a polynomial equation like this. If I have the equation x plus 2y, x plus 2y equals 4. This is a polynomial equation. So the first thing I would need to do would be to solve for y, to get the y by itself. So the first step in getting the y by itself is subtracting x here, and I would get 2y equals negative x and a positive 4. And then I could go a little further and I could actually divide both sides by 2 to get the y by itself. 2 over 2 is 1, so the 2's cancel, and I would get y equals, I can actually reduce this. 1x over 2 would just be negative 1/2 x, and then 4 over 2 is 2, so it would just be plus 2. So we did a little bit of this in the previous lesson. We solved for y. And then the other thing that we talked about was getting values of x and y. So we talked about choosing values of x, choosing convenient values of x. Convenient means something that would be easy to calculate the value of y. So what would be something that would be pretty easy to calculate? We could always start with 0. So I could start by putting in 0 for x. So if x equals 0, what is this? What is y equal to? Well, y would equal negative 1/2 times 0 plus 2. And since anything times 0 is just 0, it would be y equals 2. And so we have now an ordered pair, a coordinate. We have 0 for x and 2 for y. Let's do a couple more points. So one thing that we could try is 1. Another number we could try is 1. So if I plug in 1 into this equation where I've solved for y, I would have y equals negative 1/2 times 1 plus 2. So negative 1/2 times 1 is just negative 1/2 plus 2. That would be 1 and 1/2, right? Or 3 over 2. So I would get 3 over 2 for my y value. Now the problem with 3 over 2 is that it's kind of difficult to graph that point. So I would go 1 on the x-axis, and then 3 over 2 is 1.5, so it would be kind of ambiguous, a little bit hard to graph. And so that's why we pick convenient values of x. So we could use that value, but a better value, a better idea would be to use something like 2, because we know that 2 is going to make this fraction go away. So if I use 2 for y, or for x, then I would get, y equals negative 1/2 times 2 plus 2. So negative 1/2 times 2 would be negative 1, and then negative 1 plus 2 would be positive 1. So that's a little bit easier. And just to get one more point that would be pretty easy, let's try negative 2. If I plug in negative 2, I would get y equals negative 1/2 times negative 2 plus 2, and that would be positive 1 plus 2, which is 3. So now I have at least 3 points that I can graph easily. So we did some graphing in the last lesson. Just to make it a little easier to see, I'm going to use this big graph right here. So the y-axis is the vertical, x is horizontal. If I want to graph these points, I can go ahead and use this big graph. So my first point to graph would be 0, 2. That means I stay where I'm at on the y-axis, and then I would go up to 2 on the x-axis. The next point would be I'll just do the regular points. I won't do the fraction. 2, 1. So that would be 2, 1 like that. And then the next point was -2, 3. So -2 and then 3 up. So we can see I've got 3 points here, which I can connect with a line. And this line actually represents all of the possible solutions, because we talked about this before. There's an infinite number of solutions that satisfies this equation. There's an infinite number of x's that we could choose, and then we would calculate an infinite number of y's. So I'll go ahead and graph this again. 0, 2 on this one, 2, 1, and -2, 3. -2, 1, 2, 3. So when we graph it, it makes a line, and so that's why we call it a linear equation, because it makes a line. So let's have you do one practice here on your own. So in the next part of our notes, we'll do another equation. We'll do the equation y equals 2x minus 1. And so I want you to try to graph this equation by making a table of values with x and y. You don't have to solve for y because y is already isolated. And then at least pick 3 points that you can graph and go ahead and graph them and see if you get a line. So go ahead and do that. You can pause the video if you like. So checking the answer for this second graph, the graph of y equals 2x minus 1, I chose these 3 points. I chose to make x 0, 1, and -1, and just because those are convenient, easy values. And then I got these points. I got 0, -1, I got 1, 1, and -1, -3. And so my line looks something like this. You can see that it's touching the y-axis right here at the point -1. All right, so that's a little bit of practice with linear equations. Now we're going to try practicing a different type of line, graphing a different type of line. So go ahead and flip over your notes and we'll take a look at that. So this next type of line would be in the form y equals 3. And so if I were to try to make an x and y table for this equation, I can't really do that because there's no x for me to plug in. There is no x for me to plug in. And so what I would do is I would find 3 on the y-axis. So right here on the y-axis, 1, 2, 3, right here. And since y is always 3, it's always going to be there on that line. It's always going to be on the line 3. So I could graph that line just like this. Y equals 3. So no matter what value of x I have, if I go to -6, y is 3. If I go to +8, y is still 3. If I go to 10, y is 3. Y is always 3. It makes a flat line. It makes a horizontal line. So anytime you have something in that form, we call it y equals k. That means it's a horizontal line. Let's try another example of something kind of similar. So on the bottom, if I have something like x equals -2. So this is a similar thing because there's x value, but there's no y value. So I could try to make an x and y table and plug in values of x, but x is always going to be -2. And so what that means is I would find -2 now on the x-axis, which is right here. -2 on the x-axis. And I can just draw a line straight up and down because no matter what I try to plug in, x is always going to be right here at -2. It's a vertical line this time. So if we see something in the form of x equals h, where h is just a number, then it's vertical. All right, and so that's basically it for this lesson. Knowing how to graph lines, knowing how to distinguish when it's vertical and when it's horizontal.